Welcome to Real Guitar Success Live. I've got a great presentation for you today. I already talked about it, but I'm going to do it even better now. I'm going to teach you about chord patterns. This is something that would have made such a big difference to me if I learned it earlier on, but it has made a difference as time went on in my songwriting, ability to learn songs fast, and several other things which I'll talk about. After I do the presentation, we're going to go into our giveaway mode. We give away a Amazon gift card, $50 worth, to students who have completed the monthly practice plan. So we got them in a hat there, and we'll do a drawing.
Yeah.
By the way, this is my host, Ami Fields.
Hey, hey.
And she's got her miniature guitar with her today. Let's get started. I've written some notes on here. Please, let me start off by saying, don't worry about if this is a lot of information. Grab what you can that you can use now and know that it'll become more and more useful as you kind of come back to it. And you might even want to review this video from time to time. But you'll remember these things as they come up. The main point I want to make about chords patterns is that if you look at modern music, a large chunk, I'm talking 70, 80%, is created with patterns that you'll see over and over. And if you recognize these patterns, it will help you to learn songs faster. It gives you an efficient way to practice. Why just practice chords randomly? Practice the patterns that are going to come up in the type of music that you like. And I'm going to deal with kind of music patterns that are popular in most popular styles of music. But you know, in certain styles, there are things that are more common than others. For example, in pop music, the pop hit formula is what's commonly called a 1-5-6-4 pattern. I'll explain what those numbers mean in a minute, but it's been used over and over and over and over again. So, with that said, let me start from the beginning. I've got written a G scale on here because I'm going to use the key of G as just as an example, because I want to get concrete examples. But this applies to any key, because we're going to change each of the notes in the G scale to numbers. So a G scale is composed of the notes G, A, B, C, D, E, and F sharp. Then we start over again at G. Now, I've numbered each degree of the scale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you might say C is the 6th or the 4 note in the scale. But we're going to change those to chords now. Basically, build a chord on each letter of the scale. So we're going to make this a G major chord. The second chord, 2, is going to be a minor chord. 3 is going to be major. 4 is going to be major, C chord. That's important. The 5 chord, the D, is going to be major. The 6 chord is going to be minor. And that has to do with, if you take notes out of the scale, that's what falls naturally. In other words, if you take a E note and you take the notes from the scale, that's going to be E, G, and B, you get a minor chord. So without altering anything, it naturally falls minor. And the F sharp is a diminished chord. Diminished chords aren't going to play in these patterns, so don't worry about that for now. So now that you understand the numbers, I can talk numbers. I'm going to talk about a 1-4-5 pattern. So what I mean is I'm taking a G chord, the 1, a C chord, the 2, and a 5 chord, the 5 chord. Well, I said 1, 4, 5. 1 chord, 4 chord, and 5 chord. So in the key of G, that would be like this. 1 chord, 4 chord, I'm going to use this form of the G, and 5 chord. I'll use a regular folk style D for this presentation. 1, 4, and 5. So that's the place to start, because so much of music has been created with just the 1-4-5 in a key. It has the feeling of establishing the key. So when I play a G, and a 4 chord, the C, and the 5 chord, it feels like it's not finished till I go back to home, G. That's why it establishes the key. It feels like G becomes the home when you hear those 3 chords played maybe once or twice in a row, especially if that 5 tends to go back to the 1 chord. And this, I'm talking all the way back to classical music, all the way through 50s rock and roll, pop music, 1-4-5. Now, lots of songs have been written with lots of combinations of 1-4-5. In other words, in different sequences, like Happy Birthday. Happy Birthday, that's a 1 chord. To you, 5 chord. Happy birthday, 2, back to 1. Happy birthday, happy 4 chord, C. Happy 1, 2, 5, 1. Or Amazing Grace, that's the 1 chord. How 4 chords, sweet the sound. 5 chord. That saved a wretch like, going to 5. Back to 1. Da 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 da. 4 chord. Back to 5. I'm to 1. Sorry. 1 to 5. Da da da. So, but in this order, 1, 4, and 5, there is a whole bunch of songs that have been and will be created with that exact order, the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord. I have a few examples just to give you an idea. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. 1 chord. Lucy, 4 with diamonds. And again, 1 chord, 4 chord, and 5 chord. Or how about Bad Moon Rising, Creedence Clearwater Revival. I see the bad moon rising. 1, 4, 5. I see trouble on the way. Da 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 da. That's 1, 4, 5. Joy to the World, isn't it? Da 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 da. Here we go. Your joy, joy to the world. That's 1, 4, 5, 1. Joy to the world, the Lord has come. 1, 4, 5.
Yeah.
Now, I would recommend highly, if you get nothing else from this presentation, practice your 1, 4, 5 in the common keys for guitar. Because in the context of practicing them, first of all, you'll be using movements that you're going to use a lot in playing popular music. But also, if you practice them in different keys, over time you'll be able to change keys easily. You'll remember, and you can practice it and have it kind of come faster. But if you use these keys over and over, after a while you'll just hear it. I know 1, 4, 5. If I want to go to the key of A, I know automatically the chords in the key of A. 1, 4, 5. A, D, and E. And you can just count on your fingers to figure out what it is. I start with A, go to the 4 chord, A, B, C, D chord, and E is the 5 chord. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can do that with the 5 popular keys for guitar. What are the 5 popular keys? C, I didn't really expect you to know. C, G, D, A, and E.
Okay, that
Now,
makes sense.
here's how you can remember that. Start with C. Mm-hmm. Count up 5. C, D, E, F, G. Mm-hmm. Count up 5. G, A, B, C, D. D, E, F, G, A. A, B, C, D, E.
Okay.
The 5 most popular keys for guitar. So practice the 1, 4, and 5 in each of those keys. Start with 1. Get comfortable with it. Add another one. Try going from one to the other. So you might want to change keys. I'll go from G. Now I'll go to E. Listen. I just transposed.
There
I
you
changed
go.
keys from the key of G to the key of E.
Nice.
Now that said, if you're ready for this, we can take it up a notch. Let's add the 6 chord. Now in the key of G, 6 would be G, A, B, C, D, E, and it's going to be E minor. So now we've got the 1 chord, G, a 6 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord. That's G, E minor, C, and D. In that order, it's often called the 50s rock and roll progression because it was used in lots of 50s ballads, rock and roll ballads. But not only that, I'll give you an example. In the key of G again, G, E minor, C, and D. Blue moon. Oh, here's the sound. Or how about this? Oh, dawn, or Elvis? When no one else can understand me, wonder if you and everything I did is wrong. Or how about this? Recognize So add that 6th chord, and you've got a whole bunch of other, a progression that's used for a whole bunch of other songs. Now, and by the way, this sound is used in modern music as well, and it gives it a kind of a connection back to the 50s rock and roll. So you will hear songs, for example, where are we? Modern songs that have this turnaround pattern as well. And you'll know them if they sound a little bit like 50-ish sound. Mm-hmm. I want to go on. I want to talk about the 12-bar blues for a minute. This is, I kind of skipped. This doesn't use a 6th chord. The basic pattern for the 12-bar blues is 1, 4, and 5. But I've written up the progression here. It's 12 bars, this is what I call a 12-bar blues. Starts with the 1 chord for 4 bars, the 4 chord for 2 bars, the 1 chord for 2 bars, then the 5 chord for 2 bars, and then finally ends in the 1 chord for 2 bars. That's the basic form. There's lots of variations on it. But the reason I bring that up, not only is it used extensively for blues, but this was the pattern for a lot of that Chuck Berry style rock and roll stuff. Way down Louisiana next to New Orleans. All that is basic 12-bar blues, 1, 4, and 5 chords in any key. Back to adding the 6th chord, one of the most common progressions used nowadays is a 1, 5, 6, 4. Here's the sound. So start with the 1 chord, going to 6 chord, 4 chord. Oh, I had changed it. I went back to the 5th fret. 1 chord, 5 chord, 6 chord, and 4. There we are. That's it. 1 chord, 5, 6, minor and C. By the way, for those of you who are been playing a C chord like this, you may not realize this is another form of C. I prefer this usually, except for a certain folk and country, because this sounds more like that style of music. This is a more pop sounding C. It can also be called a C add 9. Some people call it C add 2. But it's very common in pop music, and often they just call it a C chord. So we've got the 1, 5, 6, 4. So many hit songs have been built off of this pattern. Just a few. I'm Yours by Jason Mraz. Take me home, country roads. Take me home. 5 country roads. From 6 to the place. To the 4 I'm alone. How about Can You Feel the Love Tonight, Elton John?
Oh, yeah.
With or Without You by U2, one of my all-time favorites. She Will Be Loved, Maroon 5. Let It Be by the Beatles. Let it be. Let it. 5 chord. Let it. 6 chord. Let it. 4 chord be. Whisper words of wisdom. Let it. Just for the 4th time be. Something like that. Okay. And finally, if you do nothing else but work on these progressions, you're way ahead of most guitar players that don't realize that there are patterns. And remember, by practicing these patterns, you're going to start recognizing them in songs. You'll start recognize that movement that you've been playing. And again, that's why it's good to do it in different keys, because songs are in different keys. And even though you might hear it after a while in the key of G, if you don't practice another key, you won't notice they're just in the key of A, and it's the same exact progression. Another popular one that I use a lot is traditionally called the Andalusian progression or pattern. I call it the Spanish chord progression. It's this thing.
Didn't know there was a name for it.
Yeah, and I'll do it back in the key of G. G to F, comes before F. E flat, not easy to play in the key of G. G, F. E flat, and D. No, G. No, my mistake. G starts on. It doesn't start on the 1 chord. That's the problem. So it starts on the 6 chord.
So that would be E minor.
E minor. That's it. So in the key of G, 6 chord, 5 chord, 4 chord, and 3 chord. It's actually a 3 major, so it's not, they've altered it. It's not exactly what we call diatonic or notes right from the scale. G chord, key of G. So it's really kind of in the key of E minor, if you, that's another way of looking at it.
Right.
And I know there's people that look at it both ways, so you could say either one. This is what songs like Walk Don't Run by the Ventures, Hit the Road Jack, Hit the Road Jack. Oh yeah, you gotta go faster. Hit the road Jack. Or Stray Cats, yeah. Stray Cats, I don't know, that's a little, might be dated for now, but I still remember the Stray Cats well. Things like Don't Let Me Be Understood, The Animals, again, very popular in my day. So that's kind of an optional one. If that doesn't speak to you, don't worry about that. But the other ones, extremely valuable, used in all styles of music, popular music right now.
Yeah.
Are there any questions about that?
Let's see. I don't think that anyone has mentioned anything yet, but now's a good time before we get to the pre-submitted questions. If you guys have questions about what Thomas is teaching, throw them in the chat for me.
So I know there was one question pre-submitted that Jaime asked about the 7th chord. And he's asking a 1, 4, 5, 4, 5. He finds it better sounding if you make that 5 chord into a 7. So in this example, that would be D7. 1, 4, 5 chord, and back to 1. So it's a good point. Traditionally, often that 5 chord is changed to a 7th chord.
Yeah.
So in other words, D7 in this example of the key of G. And the 7th has the function of making it sound even more spicy, so to speak, or giving a stronger pull back to the 1 chord. It really creates some tension to go back to the 1 chord. And it's like all spices. There's a time for them and a time not necessary. Think of it like if you were making a pot of soup, and black pepper people use all the time. A little too much and it's too spicy. Some soups don't call for it. It just doesn't fit. A lot of soups, it'll be just what it needs to make it have a little more oomph. That's the way it is with a 7th chord. I'd say probably more times than not, the 5 chord is changed to a D7 in this case, but a lot of times in pop music it's not. It's too, I think it sounds too cliche. That would be the word.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, so you'll hear more of this. 1, 4, 5. Without the 7th, it sounds more poppy, less cliche, traditional, that kind of strong pull back to the 1 chord.
Right. We had a question from Nihal, I believe that's how you say it. Anything must be done while learning bar chords. I guess that's actually not quite related to this. But I mean, if you're here, Nihal, elaborate on that. I mean, are you saying particularly when going between these chords? I mean, if you're in a certain key, you are going to end up with bar chords.
Clarify your question. First of all, if you're asking if bar chords have anything to do with this, it doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with how you play the chord. It only has to do with the chord form. So I can play a G like this, I can play a G like this, I can play several other versions. It doesn't matter. It's still the 1 chord.
Yeah, that's a good clarification. So if you're here, clarify that for us. If it's a general bar chord thing, that's a different story.
So it's okay to ask questions about bar chords too.
Yep. Let's see. I don't think that I'm seeing anybody with questions right now. Here's a good one. What's the most common progression for country music? That's from Daisy.
1, 4, 5. Traditional country music. 1, 4, 5.
Let's see. Yeah, that makes sense. It's like the poppy thing. Let's see. I have a couple of questions from Shulamit, so let's jump into those. And then for y'all folks that are live, please continue to ask more questions and we'll throw them in there. So Shulamit had a couple of questions. When using bass runs, how do I determine which notes to use? For example, if I want to go from A minor to E minor.
So just to be clear, I don't know like a scientific answer to that. I know basically I'm choosing notes that, first of all, sound good to me, going from one to the other, that fit. In other words, I can't have too many notes to get to the next chord in time. And over time, I've tended to just memorize which notes work well, so I don't really think about it. I'm not thinking, what note should I use here? For common keys. If I'm doing something out of a common key and I want bass notes, I'll have to think it out a little bit. So in the case of A minor, I'm also taking into account what's available to me on the guitar. So it's not a theoretical question away from the guitar. If I do on the piano something and the notes are not easy to play on the guitar, I'm not going to use it. So for an A minor to an E minor, first thing I think of is what's the bass note? Well, really, I should say I'm listening for the bass note. If I were to think it out, I'd be thinking, what's the bass note of E? And what's the bass note of A? So I'm going to get from one to the other in time. Just off the top of my head, going from A minor, might do something like that. Different one. Sounds good too, just different. Back to my original one. That one's so great. Oftentimes I'm using notes out of the scale that the key of the song is in. So I'll say this is in the key of E minor, because the A minor could be the 5 chord of E minor. So yeah, that's probably a good one. So start with the A minor. I'm somewhat limited with these 2 chords. If I were going C, I have more bass notes that are available easily to me right in that area.
Yeah, definitely. That's great. We have a couple of folks who submitted live questions, so I'm going to interject those real quick. Joe says, do power chords across the fretboard cover all the notes that we need?
Are you asking, first of all, does it cover all the chords that you need? I'm not sure what you mean by, if I were to answer that question exactly like you said it, yes is the answer. You can play a power chord in any note from A through A sharp, B, any note that you can come up with. So G power chord, that's a power chord for those of you who don't know. C power chord, B power chord, B flat, you can play a power chord starting with any root.
Mm-hmm. And just to be clear, what exactly is a power chord? What's the definition of that?
A power chord is usually 2 or 3 notes, and it's more commonly used on electric guitar, though it sounds okay on acoustic. What's happening is it's only using the first note out of a chord and the 5th note out of a chord. So in a G power chord is using a G and a D, G, A, B, C, D. Mm-hmm. And the 3rd is kind of implied. One of the big differences about power chords, and the reason I say it's a different question if you're asking me to play any chord, because it doesn't really distinguish between major and minor. There's no 3rd. In other words, a chord with a 3rd is what determines the major or minor. So G, A, B would determine whether it's major or minor. If it's a B natural, it's a minor chord. B natural is a major chord. B flat would be a minor chord. So G, B, D is a major chord. G, B flat, D is a G minor chord. So power chords, you can't really tell if they're major or minor. And certainly you can't tell if they're 7ths or some other extension, minor 7ths or any of those kind of things.
Got you. Yeah.
So I hope I answered that question. If you want to elaborate on it, or if I didn't answer what you're asking, see if you can ask a little different, a different way.
And Joe says thanks, so I think we answered the question. So I think Nihal here was kind of clarifying. They have questions, I think, regarding just bar chords in general, struggling with bar chords, especially with the high E and the B string, don't sound properly while playing bar chords.
The biggest issue I find with students learning bar chords is they assume that they can play some open chords, and that's the natural next step. But there's a big leap between playing open chords and bar chords. There's different techniques involved and different muscles that have to be developed. So approach bar chords in a developmental way, not when you need them all of a sudden and expect to get it after playing it a half a dozen or 2 dozen times even. Right. What I mean by that is take it step by step. Learn exercises to strengthen the parts of the fingers and then form it into a bar chord. I have students start with power chords, get used to moving around and also learn the root note names, then start adding other fingers. This is sort of the next step, which I add the 2nd finger, and then practice the bar separately and then put them together. And this happens over usually weeks of time, not just a day or 2. I do have a course called Bar Chords for Everyone where I'll take you through that process if you want some help. You can't do it yourself. A lot of people do. It's just a matter of making yourself go in the steps. I know as adults, and me included, tend to skip steps and want to get right to where we want to go and expect it to happen. And this is a case where you actually create a lot of tension and frustration that way without doing the steps in between.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I agree. Yeah, you got to be systematic about it because it's just throwing them in there.
I've seen this over and over, so believe me, you're not alone.
Yeah. Okay, so Shulamit had a couple more questions. When creating my own songs, how do I use, quote, pedal tones? Do I basically use a triad of the chords and just add the bass note that I want to keep constant?
So pedal tones, to be clear, are playing the same bass through a chord progression. So I'll give you an example. I'll make a 1, 4, 5 in the key E. That would be E, A, and B7. Listen, here's the E pedal tone. Playing the same bass note throughout the whole progression. Mm-hmm. So a pedal tone is an effect. If you look at popular music, and especially classical music, you can identify where composers like Bach are using a pedal tone to create a particular sound. You don't have to use pedal tones when you're creating your own songs, but they're a nice effect to add occasionally.
Yeah.
I would say that there's no magic formula. There's no certain types of chords that go with pedal tones. As a matter of fact, even sometimes, like in this case, the E, there's no E note in the D chord, but it still works. Mm-hmm. Technically, I've created a different chord, a D add 9, because that's what I would call the E. Don't worry about that. But it doesn't matter. Basically, I would just say D/E if I were writing it out for somebody. Now here's a pedal tone with the E, and I'm going to move the E by half steps. That's a sound that you've probably heard. And I resolve back on the E. Most of those chords, you would never think to put an E as a bass note, but it works because the pedal tone kind of overshadows. Your mind hears this pattern over and over, and it accepts it, even though the top part or the upper notes are actually changing. I would say the best thing you can do, Shulamit and anybody who wants to use pedal tones, is experiment and play around and look for examples in songs. This will give you an idea kind of what is normally used or what people are expecting to hear, and then be willing to break the rules occasionally. Mm-hmm. And for your own sound, to create your own sound.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good way to do that. I like that. I never knew the name for those. So pedal tones.
Pedal tone.
I like it. So we have another live question. Mr. Pesky 1 says, when is the 3-chord major? Isn't it usually minor?
Well, unless you make it major, it is.
Yeah.
So, first of all, if you take a scale, we'll use G again since I got it up here, and you just take notes out of the scale, the 3 chord's always going to fall minor. Mm-hmm. But it's not uncommon to alter notes in a chord. And that's exactly what's happened here with this. Oh, no, I got started E minor, the Andalusian progression. And then I went to a B7 chord. Naturally, it would fall as a B minor. So let me hear what it sounds like. It works. Mm-hmm. Not as powerful, but here's a 7. A natural with a 7th added. Mm-hmm. It's a different sound, and the thing is, there are things that happen more common in music, and then there are many, many times that people break the rules. It happens common enough to learn how people do things, especially like practice the progressions and the diatonic patterns. Because it's used so often, you're going to get more bang for your buck. But don't get fixed on it always has to be that way, because what makes music interesting is roughly, I heard somebody say this one time and it stuck with me, 90% of what people are used to hearing, but 10% different to make it different enough not to be the same old thing. So if you make something that's, very different, let's say, 70% different than anything anybody's ever heard, people won't accept it for the most part. They can't grab it. They can't get a hold of it. You always have an exceptional people that, can hear things a certain way. But if you make something that sounds 100% like another song, you're just going to get sued for plagiarism.
Well, there you go.
But people will say, no, that's that other song. Nobody, you might as well just play the original song.
Yeah, seriously. All right, we have a couple more questions here. If I have a song that the verse ends on the same chord that the chorus begins on, what can I use to make a transition between the two parts of the song?
Oh, good question. So this Shulamit, right? She's she likes to write songs. So in writing songs, she's saying the chorus is, let's say, 1, 4, 5. Oh, my mistake. And she has a verse where it ends on the G as well. So she wants something to kind of go back into the verse after the chorus. What's most commonly used is the 5 chord. So listen, here's a verse. Now I'm going to the chorus. Now get the chorus. So the 5 chord is a good bridge chord to kind of wants to go back to the 1 chord. Now, if you do that all the time, it's going to start sounding kind of cliche, but it's a tool that you want to use once in a while.
Yeah.
And when you don't want to use that, just experiment and find something that sounds good to you that doesn't sound like what everybody else is doing all the time.
Yeah, definitely. I wish I had more experience composing because I feel like I have ideas of things that can go there, but I'm not totally sure.
Yeah, I would try a 4 chord too. And then maybe a 4 minor. And then into the chords.
Yes.
That sounds a little more hip, huh? It's not so, it hasn't been overused so much.
Yeah.
The 5 chord that way has been used so much. It's, there's always that balance. First it's used, wow, I know this thing, and then it's used so much after, well, that's cliche.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that. Okay, and the last one here. What is the easiest way to play the E chord on the ukulele?
I don't know. But I know someone who does.
Don't change the key. No, I'm just kidding. Let's see. So there's a couple ways.
Must
to
be hard.
It's not too bad. So when you're looking at the E chord, there are 2 main ways to do it. There's one that I prefer. So that would be first finger on the 2nd fret of your A string. You're going to skip the 3rd fret completely, and then you're going to do 4th fret on all the rest of your strings. So like this. Personally, I do not like using my pinky in there.
That's a lot to get in.
It's a lot to get in. So I normally just kind of do a partial bar with my middle finger. So I'll use my middle finger to block both the G string and the C.
That's
and then add my ring
do.
finger in there. And there's the E chord. Now, if that's too much for you, or if you feel like you don't get that stretch, which you should probably be okay if you're able to play guitar, then this is not much of a stretch. For you players, it's a thing though. Remember on the ukulele, I mean, you can almost bar chord this thing, right? So if like this is your C chord, C sharp, D, D sharp, you can also play your E chord there. So you can just bar your 4th fret and make a C chord shape. So same thing. So
got it.
Or, and like the nice thing about the ukuleles is anytime you're covering all 4 of your strings, you can move your chord. So if this is E, then you can actually technically go half step up.
F sharp, G.
There's another version of G, right?
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so it's a movable chord. So practice doing that. And again, if you want to jam all 3 fingers in there, you can. I personally feel like I have no control when I do that, though.
Sure
I much prefer just use 2 like that, or And then deciding which C chord or E chord to use really depends on the song and where you're coming from and where you're going to. So just kind of use your logic on that and find what's comfortable for you. And sometimes you don't really want that really high note up in there. It just doesn't fit for what you're doing. So yeah, that's the E chord.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Any more questions before we close up for today?
Yeah, I think we do have a couple more. And Shulamit says, Amit, that's exactly what I do. Good. You're doing it right. Good job. Okay, I think we have one last question. And by the way, if there's anybody else with any final questions, like this is your final call, so submit them in the chat now. This is a pre-submitted one from Jan. Jan says, I am new to fingerstyle. Most fingerstyle songs have the chords above the notes. I recently purchased a piece of fingerstyle music that doesn't show the chords. The chords give me an idea of where my fretting fingers should be. Is there a simple way to help me figure out the chords when they're not shown?
Oh, so I'm assuming that you have a piece of music that is written out with notation, maybe tablature, but with notation, if you don't know how to read music, the answer is no.
Yeah.
Go find another piece of music or find that same song somebody else wrote with the chords. And I can relate, by the way. I often take a piece of sheet music, and because as a guitar player, I look for the chords. Now, if you're playing finger style, like picking patterns and singing a song, you really do either need the chord forms or you have to learn to read music and be able to discern a chord. There's no simple, easy way that you can just have a trick and glance through it that I know of. Yeah, I would say knowing, I do read music, and I could see that's the only way I would know how to figure out what chord. If you have tablature, it's a little easier. You can kind of look through the tablature and figure out the chord by just playing through the tablature and see what chord form comes up.
Exactly.
I would take it though, if you had tablature, they're showing you note by note how to actually play the finger picking pattern. So you might as well just go with it and play it the way they're showing it.
Yeah, exactly.
If it's an actual guitar solo piece, that's by far the best way to do it because you're going to have the melody and everything built in. If it's just a finger picking pattern, you could take one bar and learn that finger picking pattern and then look through and see how many times that same pattern comes up. So you don't really have to follow it bar by bar.
Right. I think the hard part for me when trying to kind of decipher those things is like you also have all these inversions. So like even though you can figure out what notes are in that chord, personally for me being able to identify that chord is really hard because I'm like there's so many different inversions, so many different ways to name a chord.
What she's talking about inversions is, let's say you have a chord, this G major chord, that's GBD. The G doesn't have to be on the bottom and this note next and this note next. It could be switched around. The D could be on the bottom and then the other, or the B could be on the bottom. So it doesn't have to be in the exact order. That's called inverting. If it's starting with G and going up, that's a G chord. We call it first inversion.
Yeah.
Or no, first inversion is when you actually put a different note in the bass.
Yeah.
And then second version, a different note. I think it's a third in the bass means first inversion.
Yep.
A D or
Fifth
a fifth
in the bass,
note would be
second inversion,
so on.
yeah.
Anyway, too much, right? In any case, no, you're gonna. I would go looking for another piece of music unless you know. Well, the thing is, if you want to play that song, it's going to take you a long time to figure out how to look at the notes and figure out what chord goes with that. I'd suggest learning at least to read tablature and basic notation, but that won't help for this song.
Yeah, totally. So I don't think we have any more questions here. I've already thrown out the last call. I am getting lots and lots of feedback from everyone that they've really enjoyed the presentation today.
I'm glad.
So I'm glad you guys got something out of it. Some people were like, thanks, this is awesome, really great.
I'm really glad. This has really helped me. As a matter of fact, I remember a time when I was called as a kind of a gun for hire and played in bands. They just called me, and first night, I never rehearsed with them. I didn't know what to play. And I remember the band leader would just go, key of G, 1, 4, 5. I knew right, just smile and play along.
Yep.
And I had a compliment on break. Person come up, wow, how long you guys been together? You sound great.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't say anything. I didn't want to blow it,
Yeah.
but that was the first night we were together. I was just following. I just knew my patterns, and the leader would tell me what key was in. They'd tell me if there was a change in the pattern. He'd say, key of G, watch out for the 3 chord. It's major instead of normally minor. He'd just say that. I knew exactly what he was talking about.
Perfect. That's good. All right. Are you ready for the raffle?
Let's do the raffle.
Okay.
Let's give away a gift card.
Yeah.
So these are people who are members of Real Guitar Success. They've completed the practice plan for a month, which is a reward in and of itself. But just to make it fun, we throw in a gift card, a raffle with a gift card for those people.
And the winner is...
She has to mix them all up.
Pat.
Pat, congratulations, Pat. We'll be sending you that gift card. And congratulations, everyone who finished the month's practice sessions. You are now a better guitar player than you were the month before.
Nice. Cool.
That's it?
That's it.
That's it. Sorry to go for now. But we'll be back in April.
April, first Tuesday.
First Tuesday of the month. Our time, 12 noon. Not sure what time it is for you guys. But I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Thomas Michaud. I'm E. Fields. Have a great month if we don't talk before.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.